on 100%, come through to about 20 frames, drop it to 0, come through again to about 80 frames, create a keyframe, come through to another 5 or 6 frames and crank it up, and then create another keyframe about 10-15 frames later and drop it down to 0. So that's the effect we're going for. Might put a little one at the end here, create a keyframe, and then at the very end we'll drag it up to 100. There we go. So we've got one at the very end which is 0, and then just before the end is 100, so it'll ramp up and then drop off. And back in the master comp we can see that that's taken effect there, works fine. And the last thing we need to do, we'll go into our mag comp, switch on motion blur, and for all of the locators switch on motion blur. We'll get rid of our reference comp, we don't need that anymore. In our graphic overlay we want the vertical meter, switch on the motion blur. We want the vertical number, switch on the motion blur. For our horizontal number, switch on the motion blur. For horizontal meter, switch on the motion blur. And we might as well switch on a bit of motion blur for that distortion as well. And that looks fine, it's working all fine. Switch on motion blur for that. And come back out into the master comp. On the background, switch on motion blur, and on the and that's probably it, just the background layer there, and everything looks to be working fine. The last thing we need to do is with our gradient overlays, bring up T for opacity, and we're going to drop that down to 80%, and that way it's going to leave a little bit of opacity over the top of our targeted image. So we'll do a RAM preview. Okay, so